every reviewer that I've ever spoken to really is looking for the same kinds of things. You know, real estate, the key thing about real estate is location, location, location. The three things, features of an excellent grant are excellent ideas, and excellent ideas. So we're going to assume that everybody in the room has excellent ideas. I think the key thing for when you're writing a grant is to package those ideas in such a way that other people understand how excellent those ideas really are. And that's what we're going to try to talk about today. So the first question is now, who decides if a grant is excellent? In other words, who rates the scientific merit of a proposal? And basically, you can read the options, and obviously all applicants think their grant is excellent, so they're not the ones who decide. The study section review administrator, no, they don't decide. They are administrators. The reviewers, they're the ones who decide. And the program officer and the council are just other people in the decision tree. But it's the reviewers who really decide if a grant is excellent. And this is why it's necessary to address the reviewer's interests when you're writing a grant, and specifically when you're writing the specific aims. So the real challenges of writing an excellent grant are to have truly excellent ideas and then to communicate them. And if the reviewers cannot see how excellent your ideas are, your grant will not get an excellent score, even if it is excellent. But if you don't communicate them, you won't get through. So this means that your presentation has to be key. So the importance of your presentation, excellent ideas can be invisible if the presentation isn't clear. So it's not going to get a good score if it's not well presented. High quality presentation can enhance the idea, and you can have good science and a good presentation. You might get scored, but you're not going to get a competitive score. And finally, you have to have both combine your excellent science with an excellent presentation, and then you'll get a great score. And, we're shooting. I always tell people, don't shoot to be in the top 10%. Don't shoot to be scored. Aim to be the #1 grant in your study section. If you're #1, you don't have to worry. We're really going to talk only about one part of a research grant. And that's the second item on this list, the specific aims. Every grant, no matter what agency you're doing, has a different format for the grant. And I suppose the first principle of grant writing is to read the instructions. So since we're all in the room educators, we're going to presume that all of you know how to read and can read the instructions. But for a research grant, the next level, the most important page, is this specific aims page. That's the one page that all the reviewers read. And I'll just say, probably they all read it first. Okay? So, and that has something to do with how you write the grant. So what to write when? I'll tell you, the first thing to write is the specific aim section. And you write this first, then you write it again, and then you rewrite it, and then you write it for a third time. And when you're finally done, you've probably rewritten the specific aims 10 or 20 times before you're ready to move on and do the rest of the proposal. You need to get the specific aim section right. Okay? Now, all of you have read lots of papers. And in fact, experts estimate that each of us read somewhere between 100 and 1,000 papers for every paper that we write. So it doesn't matter if you're a beginning scientist and you've written one paper. Those undergrads and first-year graduate students have read up between 100 and 1,000 papers by the time they write their first paper. You get to be a postdoc and you've maybe got 10 papers under your belt. Well, you still read between 10 and 1,000 papers for each paper that you wrote. And years later, when you're an advanced and skilled scientist, you still have read between 10 and 1,000 papers for every paper you write. But what this means is that even when you start to write your first paper, you have an internal representation of what a good paper looks like. And that's very different than when we write a grant. When we start with grant writing, the first time you write a grant, you've probably never read one. Maybe you have read one, but that's probably about it. And this makes it difficult because you don't have an internal representation of what a good grant looks like. And it's not until later in your career when you move into a study section that the ratio of papers to grants read to grants written becomes big. And when you serve on study section and you go in and you read 10, 12, 20, 100 grants in a single week, by that time, you learn a lot about how to read grants. And this is where you, who as scientists, need to draw on those of us who have experience in review panels and learn from us what a good grant looks like. So, and that's partly why this workshop is being given. So let's start with now this mysterious specific aim section. First thing I want to do is to draw attention to the title of this section. It's called the specific aim section. It's not called the general aim section. It's not called the sort of what I want to do section. This is the specific aim section. And that means that you need to be specific in this section. And it's really important that you are specific. So basically, this section has two parts. Usually it's about 1 page long. There's one paragraph that begins the specific aim section. And it's a short general statement about what your proposal will address, both long and short term. And I'll be giving you an example of a discipline-free specific aim section. And then the next part, and this should be probably 80 to 90% of the page, is a set of specific aims, each with a hypothesis. Now, what does that mean? It means each aim has to have a hypothesis. It doesn't mean that you have one hypothesis and you then sort of tell them what you're going to do. You need to have a hypothesis for each aim. If you have 3 aims, then you have 3 hypotheses. And what you will test, how you will test them, and what you expect the results to be. And of course, the aims have to be in a logical and sequential order. Now, this is the most important page in the application. Think about who a reviewer is. The reviewer is a faculty member or a research or a scientist in a laboratory at an institute, or sometimes even a drug company, who comes in and gets asked to be a reviewer, and they are given some grants upon which they are asked to provide their expertise. They don't get time off from work to do this. They have to do it in their spare time. So they come home, well, unless they're already home, and then they have to do this, in the evening after the kids are in bed. And the last thing they want to do is to concentrate on somebody's ideas. But they do. Just like all of the rest of us, they're dedicated to science. So, but if you don't stimulate their interest, you want them to read your specific aim section and then to be too excited to go to bed. You want them to understand this is a good project, and that means you have 1 page to sell them. 1 page. And if you do, you win. And if you don't, they're going to set your grant aside and look through the rest of the stack until they find one that they are interested in. That's the one they'll stay up late reading. So Again, start with this section, get feedback, rewrite it, make it good, make it interesting. And this means your writing can't be boring. All right, so now audience participation. What I want you to do is to take a blank document and write a few sentences about that experiment, as if you were writing a specific game section for a grant. Well, you're going to sit there and say, well, you haven't told me anything yet. Yeah, that's right, I haven't. What I want you to do is to see what you know. Where do you stand? This is probably a mixed group. So think of an experiment that you are doing or that you want to do and write it down. What is the specific aims of that project, of that one specific aim for that experiment? So normally what I would do at this point would be to ask you to change papers with somebody next to you and read that paper and ask and try to understand what is the experiment that the person next to you is proposing. Well, we can't do that. So just look at your paper yourself and ask yourself if the proposal makes sense. Pretend you're someone else and look for keywords. Keyword like the goal. If you have that, that's good. If you have the word the hypothesis is, that's good. If you've got the phrase to test this hypothesis, then you some sort of method that you're going to use. If you have something that says the rationale for this experiment is, and then if you have another phrase that says the expected results and significance are, you're in good shape and you can probably just hang up and go away. If you don't have those words, then we'll now go through why you should have them and what the rest of the proposal looks like. We're going to do this, and then there'll be a chance for you to rewrite. So basically, those questions that were on the last slide are designed to help you understand what it is the reviewers are looking for. When I review a grant, I'm looking and asking myself, what's the goal? What's the big picture? By the goal, I mean something bigger than just the hypothesis. And then once you tell me what the hypothesis is, then you're going to tell me how you're going to test it. So before you write, you need to develop an overall solid hypothesis for your project. What's the overall goal of your research plan? And what specific hypotheses or sub-hypotheses you will test in each aim? And then why is each aim significant? And overall, why is the project new, exciting, or creative? Frequently, when a grant with a high score comes around, meaning a good score comes around at the end of the review process, the end of the review discussion, the people in the audience who are listening start to ask the question, how does this advance the field? What's going on that's going to make this, if we fund this project for 3 to 5 years, what's going to make it better? So this means you need to understand how and communicate how new and exciting or creative your project is, and discuss this with your hypothesis to make sure that they agree with you. So coming back here, the key word is specific. Explain what you're going to do. Each aim needs a hypothesis. Each aim needs an experimental approach. How the hypothesis will be tested, the expected results, and the significance. Now, this is redundant. You've heard this before. But you need to make everything obvious when you're writing a grant. So what I like to tell people is you need to tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So this is an iterative approach. Each section of the grant each paragraph of the grant has to have all three of these components. I'll show you what I mean on the next slide. So how do you tell them what you're going to tell them? So this is a one-paragraph introduction to a problem. Now this is a problem, a specific aims that's probably not related to anybody's discipline, and at the same time should be understandable to all. So would be the first paragraph of a specific aim section. Water is a crucial need for agriculture. Okay, there we go. I've explained what's important. The goal of this project. So the second sentence, I'm already telling them what it is that I'm going to do. What's my goal? I'm going to test the hypothesis. Oh, all of a sudden there's a hypothesis. So even 2 lines in, we already are discussing the hypothesis. And then the hypothesis is that the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Now, we could probably put that to song, and some people have. But the point is, this is a easily understood hypothesis. And now I'm providing some background. So the old, widely known hypothesis, it's become clear that rain alone, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, I tell them that to test this hypothesis, we will have 3 specific aims. And each of these aims are going to do certain things. Okay? So the point is that you look at this paragraph and what's missing? Many of you are going to say, well, there's no background. That's right. You have a background section for your grant. You don't need to put much background in the specific aims. You need to tell them what you're going to do specifically. All right? Now, so this was tell them what you're going to tell them. I'm going to do this. I'm going to test this hypothesis. Next, you tell them in aim 1, what is it specifically that you're going to do? Aim 1 is the key to the proposal because it sets the stage, usually both conceptually and methodologically. You want to have aim 1 be a big hook to the reviewer. You want to hook the reviewer so that they want this project to be done. So here's one version of it, and you can read this to yourself and you'll say, all right, but let's now look at this. What's really there is same version, but now I've put the key words in red. So you can see them, you can understand how this specific aim section is structured. In the first sentence, I'm telling you what is the hypothesis of specific aim 1. And in the second sentence, I'm telling you how we're going to test this hypothesis. And in the third and fourth sentences, I'm telling you about the data and what we expect to find. And at the end, I tell you what the significance is, what it would mean. So basically, in this paragraph, we've highlighted and answered all of those questions that were asked a few slides ago when I asked you to, after we looked at what you had written yourself. So this paragraph now can serve as a template for your own specific aim section. Keep the ones that are written in red, and then insert your own information, your own project into those blank lines. With one caution, and I'm going to tell you, there is a fatal error in this aim that hopefully somebody will check. There's one word that is so wrong that anybody who knew anything about this area would immediately say this grant applicant knows nothing and we should just send him away. There's one, that's not a word, it's actually a fact. When you write a grant, not only do you have to be scientifically correct, but you actually have to be correct. The key thing is the word Hibernian Peninsula. Hibernia is Ireland, and Iberian Peninsula is where Spain is. So it's sort of like getting the pancreas and the liver mixed up if you were writing a grant in biology. It's like, 2 impossible things to put together. The applicant who wrote this failed the geography test And but I put that mistake in intentionally because I wanted people to pay attention. Every word counts. So then you tell them the additional aims need to be logical. And I build upon the same template. So in aim 2 starts out the same way. The hypothesis of specific aim 2 is that the snow in Spain falls mainly in the mountains. How this hypothesis will be tested, this aim is necessary, and this is because whatever reasons are. Specific aim 3, there's a hypothesis, this is necessary to test this hypothesis, etc. These aims are designed to be the same way because it makes the reader follow them easier. If you've given them a pattern, then they can follow that pattern. In each case, the word hypothesis is key. So the last paragraph, there's usually a paragraph that I put at the bottom, is you give the reviewers some words to use in the review. If you do it right, they'll quote you. They won't even give you credit for it, but they'll quote you to tell the rest of the hierarchy of the grant writing community why this project is important. So in this case, what I've done is written some stuff about why if this aims are successful, how it's going to increase agricultural efficiency and save $2 quadrillion a year. So that's something that you want to give the reviewers something back. So now, what have you learned? We've prepared a template. Finish those sentences and look at the same experiment that you did before. Your proposal now should make more sense if you were a different person than the one who wrote it. You should be able to see words like the goal, the hypothesis, to test the hypothesis and the rationale, and the expected results and significance are, because that was part of the template. So they should be there, they should be clear, written in plain, simple, declarative sentences. That's what the reviewers want to see. They want to see plain, simple, declarative sentences where you tell them the hypothesis is to test this hypothesis. We will do. They're tired, they're human, they really want to understand, they want to like your proposal. You want to make it easy for them. A few words about the rest of the grant. You've got all the power of 21st century computers at your fingertips. Make the grant easy to read, make it pretty, use text formatting. Why? Because reviewers believe that scientists need to be able to pay attention to detail. And most reviewers will assume that a person who submits a disorganized proposal with typographical errors will conduct sloppy science. You need to make it clear. You need to make it easy. You need to make it pretty. When you do this, you have to be persistent. If at first you don't succeed, try again. I know there's a few people out there from the College of Education. So this is from the teacher's manual. And so, all right, it's still true after 180 years, but let's do this. It's still true for specific aims. So now, remember I said you need 20 drafts. You need to get feedback and revise. How do you do this? Well, if you think about it, if a colleague comes to you with a completely written grant and says to you, could you read this and give me some feedback? They're all going to say yes. And then a week, 2 weeks later, they're going to give you back a few pages with some scribbles on, and it might even be too late because the deadline is passed. But almost everyone is going to be willing to read a one-page specific aim section, and they're going to do it quickly. They're going to do it and give it back to you the next day. And so you want to get an experienced colleague to read and comment. It doesn't even have to be someone from your discipline. It could be anyone. The other thing you can do is you can corner Evangeline or Beth and ask the Office of Research Development to organize a mock study section. Now, there's plenty of people on campus who've been on study section, some of them probably even in your discipline, and they can get together and have people simulate of what happens at a real study section. And then you can hear how reviewers review. How do they think about ideas? How do they think about grants? But to come back to the main point, when you're writing the specific aims, you want to revise it. You want to get it right. If you have it right, if you have it written down according to the template, then you can see that the template is written in such a way that all the components you need in the experimental design section are already there. A good specific aims section will make the rest of the grant write itself. Now, Beth has responded to everyone. We're happy to do that. So Beth, that's for number 2, and she's the boss. So if you want a mock study section, she'll do it. Tell her if you want it. Molly Romano asks, do you find that you move away from the template with experience? Yeah, the template is just a start. And it depends on what you're working on and how experienced you are, and it's more precisely what your science is. You might find that you need to write it differently. The general principles hold that you really want to make it clear and easy for the reviewers to understand. So depending on what you're writing, you can do that. Do you stick to a winning formula? Yeah, that's why I teach it this way. Well, grants I've written this way, and the people I know who take this template and use it get good scores.
How much time do you think a PI should spend in the beginning of this section discussing the nature of the problem that he or she's going to be addressing? So saying, for example, COVID-19 is an important issue today, and would they spend some additional sentences, 2 or 3, elaborating on that point before they actually turn to their specific aims? What's your point of view on that?
My point of view is that they should, as quickly as they can, tell us what is it you're going to do. And so that means you can defer those statements to the background section.
So you would want to have at least a sentence or 2 where you state what the problem is and then turn to your aims. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think a sentence or 2 is really all you want. Many people write too much before they get to the aims, and then their aims become too telegraphic to be specific.
Richard, I know that you've had mock review panels in the past. Have you noticed that people that go through mock reviews end up with better scores ultimately after going through that exercise?
I don't have enough experience to be able to make that comparison. What I can tell you is that if you work with me or with other people who have a clear idea of what a grant should look like and exchange it multiple times, you'll get a better score. So the best example I have of that is a colleague who I worked with on her first grant. She brought it to me 3 days before the deadline and handed me a 25-page document and said, can you give me some feedback? And gave it back to her the next day and told her it was unfocused and that she really needed to change it. And she said, I don't have time. Well, I said, well, submit it the way it is. Of course, she got the feedback back a few months later after it was reviewed that said it was too unfocused. So we took that grant, and what did she do with was response to the critique was she took the first specific aim, and I convinced her to save the other 2 specific aims for future grants. And she submitted that first specific aim, expanded it into 3 aims, and she got a really close to being able to be funded score. And then we did that a second time. So the final grant that she got funded was at the 1 percentile funding range, very high very good score. but was 1/9 of what she originally proposed. So new investigators frequently are too ambitious, and they're trying to submit a project that is way too beyond what they can do in a reasonable period of time.
Can you talk a bit about the importance of the later aims not depending on the success of the early aim?
That is quite important. You want your first aim to be a win-win aim. That is that if your first aim is a failure, meaning if it doesn't work out the way you want, and your second and third or later aims depend on it, then you've got all your marbles in one basket, and that's a fatal flaw, and the reviewers will note that, particularly if they think your first aim isn't going to succeed. So you need to write it in such a way, or construct your hypotheses in such a way that it doesn't matter if the first aim is successful, meaning it follows what your hypothesis is, or that your hypothesis is proven wrong, because in either case you will have experiments to do in aims 2 and 3 that are follow-up to whatever it is. Okay. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great day.